back there, I could sense the immense disappointment that they let the fans down and not delivered that the ECW classic I think they wanted to give. I don't quite know what went wrong, and we don't have a segment for that because these guys are two of the most fantastic workers ever in the history. They have the best foundation, can do amateur, can do your basic pro wrestling, can be very exciting, can be very hard-nosed, can make it look like a shoot. And with that being said, this was kind of on the radar of being almost like a Tully and Shane Douglas shoot type thing where it was uncomfortable pacing. And I watched it back and I was like, everything, it wasn't like anything felt like it tied in together. I don't know if I'm going to be able to kind of like put this into words, but I'm going to try to. When I'm watching it, it looked like each spot, which didn't feel like a spot. It just felt like both guys were either struggling for position, got one move in, did something here. They might have ran a little bit here and there and made it look like pro wrestling a little bit here and there. But as JR would say, it felt like the entire match was tougher than shoe leather. It felt like a shoot. Now, this isn't like when Kurt and Chris Benoit at WrestleMania had that amazing sequence of just amateur wrestling. Remember the beginning of that match where they were just going at it and it was, but they were going at it and they were being rough, but it looked like there was a level of cooperation. This felt like just an off night for Eddie and Chris where they just weren't on the same page. And was it a bad match? Not by wrestling standards, but by Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit. This might have been one of the worst matches they've ever had together. And afterwards, backstage, it just you felt the tension, the awkwardness. Were they going to fight? No, but it was kind of like you take your tape off, you're not really looking, and then they were talking, and then they were walking, and they were both pacing, and it was just odd. They weren't like talking like they usually talk to each other. It was like Chris taking his tape off, throwing it down on the production box, be like, man, what was that? Eddie's just kind of like pacing, and then they're talking, and then I think like the next time I saw both of them, they were totally fine. But it was just weird. And we've all been there as workers where you're trying to get it back on track, not with a death row, but with another amazing worker. And it's just not, and I'm sure in the back of their minds, this is where the wrestlers, they don't treat it like just another night. You might say whatever about Kevin Nash, but remember, WrestleMania 11 with Shawn, he was like, that was just another night. WrestleMania this, it was just another night. We were on the road all the time. You might think that's a level of apathy. But that, to me, all he says, I'm going to try just as hard as I do on a house show as I do WrestleMania. But I'm also not going to overthink and try way too hard for WrestleMania because it's just not going to translate. And that's what I believe happened. They said, we were in ECW, got started in the ECW. They put us on the map essentially before we got hired from these other companies. Let's go out there and just tear the house down. You get all these preconceived notions, these delusions of grandeur when you go out there and you work yourself into a shoot. And that's what it felt like to me. And the more they tried to say, we're trying to do a match that's one for the ages, it starts breaking down. Because you kind of feel they were just trying too hard out there when they could have phoned it in and had the match of the decade if they wanted to. Did you feel that? What's your take watching it?
It's with Eddie and Benoit, right? At the time, it still felt like a dream match, even though you'd seen them wrestle 20, 30 times. That's the crazy thing. It was still a dream match that you've already seen, but it doesn't matter. And I remember at the time, it just didn't seem to deliver. But obviously, you know, I have not been or never will be a worker, so I can't pinpoint it at all. But yeah, it seemed awkward. Now, there's a couple of theories out there. One, we believe that Eddie Guerrero was pretty unhappy being told that he was losing clean, which he did. So you never know, that could always not help.
Or tapping out, more so tapping out.
Tapping out, indeed. The other thing was, this is the fans, because the WWE guys had just turned up in the balcony 1 or 2 matches prior. So the fans were more taunting them than paying attention to the match. And then when you haven't got the fans, maybe you work a bit too hard to try and get them back. And then, yeah.
That's a great point. You're absolutely right. You're trying to hit each other harder and do things to get them to turn back around, but it doesn't translate. Even if it is real, like the Mike Rotunda Death Row segment, when it gets more real, it actually gets more boring to a pro wrestling fan. It gets more the pace, the air seemed to be sucked out of the building in a way during that match between them two. It felt like that. Yeah. Let me ask you this question because I'm not sure of the timeline. Did this match take place before or after Eddie became WWE champion?
After, by a year. I think this may have been correct me if I'm wrong, this may have been their first singles match since they were both world champion.
Because WrestleMania 20 was when he and Chris had the titles at the end of the pay-per-view.
Yeah, that's 2004. And then 2005...
was One Night Stand.
Yeah, 2005 One Night Stand. But this is also goes to my next point, is that this is, I hate to say this is sort of the second big-time match that was a bit of a disappointment with Eddie Guerrero involved. And it was Eddie versus Rey Mysterio at WrestleMania 21. And that was, once again, it wasn't a bad match. It was a very good match. But they subverted my expectations, who remembered the Eddie versus Rey matches from WCW when Eddie was a cruiserweight. But by 2005, he's a lot older. I'm sure a bit creakier. It hurts the joints and everything a lot more. And plus, it looked like he put 100 pounds of muscle on as well. So it wasn't the match that I was hoping to see. And I'm wondering if it's the same for Chris and Eddie in 2005. They're both older. They're both bigger. And maybe... I don't know whether they thought they could recapture the ECW, WCW Japan magic, or they were trying to do something completely different to sort of work around their limitations, if they had any limitations, of course, at that point.
Well, those are all great factors to think about. And I think, number one, you're due to have an off night. And Murphy's Law in pro wrestling is always going to be your off night will be at the very worst time. When you want, and overthinking and overbooking it and over trying to put the match together and not trusting your natural instincts. That we've had matches before that are awesome. And how much did we talk? Like maybe for 5 minutes. Just go out there and do what we do. I dare I say it, if they just went out there, worked towards the finish and just did what they did, it would have been 10 times better. But Eddie, if that's the rumor and it's true, I can understand. You were WWE champion a year before. Now you're here at ECW One Night Stand, and dare I say, you're looking at something. Now, whoever put the match together, too, these two guys were both world champions in 2004 at WrestleMania 20, right? Mm-hmm. So when you're looking at that, it's kind of a push that the both of them are a little bit lower on the card at this time. So they probably had something to prove with this match as well. Everything we're talking about, even if 50% of what we're talking about is what they're thinking, they're overthinking it. So, and I mean, it's way past the point of even trying to guess. So I just feel bad for them because these are two guys that took great pride in their work. And back there, I could sense the immense disappointment that they let the fans down and not delivered the ECW classic I think they wanted to give.
I think for the rest of 2005, since WrestleMania 21, Eddie would never win a pay-per-view match again. He would lose to Rey at WrestleMania, lose to him at Judgment Day by DQ, lose to Benoit at One Night Stand, lose to Rey again at Great American Bash, lose once again to Rey for custody of Dominic Mysterio on a ladder. I always like, Dominic on a pole kind of thing. And then his last pay-per-view match, he lost to Batista. So, I mean, I can imagine, because I believe at the time, and I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that there was the weight of the world on his shoulders in 2004 when he was the champion. And when you are the champion and business isn't doing so well, you take it more personally. And then 2005, it looks, at least from just the pay-per-view win-loss ratio, I mean, what does that matter ultimately? But from the pay-per-view win-loss ratio, the Office knew it, and they sort of just pegged him down one level. And who knows how much that can affect someone's mental well-being going into a match.
But dare I say it, during those losses you're talking about, especially against Rey, because I'm not sure when he started doing it, his heel persona was awesome. He didn't need a title or wins, and maybe that's why they kept putting people over on him, because they they went over, but he constantly got more over. Even the song, you go back to the Dreamer thing, the song, how they remixed the babyface lie, cheat, and steal into the cell phone and the phone kind of like effect with the dude. You talk about one of the most over characters ever. The same character as a babyface, just tweaked a little bit and now full blown heel. He didn't need a title. So if Eddie was, and I feel bad because if I had the perspective and the knowledge and the way of looking at things, and he was frustrated, I was like, dude, you're like one of the most over characters that'll be remembered for years and decades after this. Stop. You don't need the wins. You know, you become a babyface and you're not getting promo time and you're not getting sympathy and you're putting people over. Join me on Heat. I'm right over here because that's where but you're way more over than anybody. Stop.
Yeah, I don't want to say when, the win-loss ratio. That's why I sort of said at the end, it doesn't really matter. Not
with Eddie.
Yeah.
Not with Eddie and that character. No, you could beat him every night and people would hate him.